So when Rick asked me to do this trail, it was intriguing to me because when I came back to New York City after many years away, probably a decade away, I was up for a job at AOL. And to get that job, my boss, my then future boss, said, I need you to tell me what your SEO strategy was. I happened to be sitting in Tokyo at the time, and I was like, could I write I don't believe in SEO, or SEO is bunk, or like, let's just get rid of SEO? And I was like, that's really not the way to win a job at AOL. And so I went on to learn to love things like SEO. I learned to think about page views and impressions. And so when Rick asked me to do this, I was like, okay, I'm really a content creator. I'm a journalist for 30 years. But I felt like this was really important to talk about and to push hard on, because a lot of what we talk about in terms of video views, impressions, time spent, etc., are all things that we also talk about in the traditional journalism world. And we see how well that's worked for journalism, right? Right, because things that are fake often click through. Things that are fake often get great video views. And so I'm going to be a little pushy on this trail because I think measurement is something that can drive us to greatness, but it can also drive us to distraction, and it can also drive us to create content that nobody will watch and nobody will care about. What I loved was that actually the people talking before me, a couple of the metrics that I loved, particularly from Skullcandy, was a 175% increase in e-commerce. A direct relationship from beautiful content and beautiful work to people buying something. And too often in branded content, when I was at the Journal and work that I've done, is people would say, well, you know, it doesn't actually need to lead to that. Branded content serves a different purpose. I call time on that. If you are spending millions of dollars to create great content and you can't prove back to your CEO that it did something more than somebody saw it for a split second on YouTube, then I'm gonna say that you haven't really done your job. The other one that I loved was, I don't know who came up with a Oreo music box, but wow, who thinks that up? But selling out in 72 hours, like amazing, right? Those statistics mean something to me. And so as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind that I'm going to ask you for some really hard conversations in your trail about what you're measuring, why you're measuring it, why you even do what you do, and how you track it back. And then I'll have Lee come up on stage and we'll talk. So as you all fly back to your various places, you may go to the ladies' or men's room, or I should say just women's and men's room. And you may, and I have Simon Kelly of Story Worldwide to thank for this anecdote, you may see something like this as you walk out of the bathroom. To tell you, did you have a great experience in your bathroom? Did you have a meh experience in your bathroom? And as Simon and I were talking for this project and for the white paper that I wrote, he said, you know, there is somebody's job who has to sit there and decide whether the smiley face meant anything or the frowny face meant anything, and change what they do in those bathrooms. And he said, I know it seems weird, but I kind of think that that's what metrics and measurement for branded content feels like right now. Agree to disagree. All right, some important comments from the people who are quoted in my white paper. Kirsten Falk, we have leaned too hard on engagement metrics because that's what the platforms emphasize. I have begun to question, just because someone engages with your content, has it changed your perception, their perception of your brand? Mark Battaglia, Marriott, right? Known for this amazing branded content projects that they run. If 3 million people watch something and no one comments, that's a failure. It's a failure. Nobody commented on it. They saw it, but did they do anything with it? And then finally, Abby Klinecki, who's a client that we had at the Wall Street Journal, who I loved. I'm not sure everybody loved Abby Klinicki, but I loved Abby Klinicki. Measurement has become a distraction because we have so many things to measure, right? And with all due respect to Lyft, when Lee and I looked at each other and said, there's all these spreadsheets that we go through every week, and it's like, but what are you measuring and what do those numbers tell you? I hope they tell you something, and I hope that you're able to actually then turn that data into knowledge. So how do we get to measurements we trust? Because pretty much what I heard literally from every single person was they don't trust the numbers that they're given by the platforms, by the publishers, by the agencies. They simply do not trust those numbers. So if you don't have trust in your numbers and you cannot depend on those foundational elements to tell you whether branded content works or not, then somehow we're not doing our jobs in branded content. We are failing to create great content that is then directly tracked back to our company's goals and what we need to do for them. So, a few things that I'd like to talk about, and I'd have you talk about in your trails. One of the ideas that came out of our conversations with marketers was standardization. Can we come to some consensus or some standard on actually what measurement matters? Because a video view is a video view is a video view is not actually true. Because video views on one platform means one thing, video views on another platform means another. Impressions as explained by one person means one thing, engagement by another person means another thing. Time spent, well, what does that mean? Is it, do you count a video view when it's 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds? I count a video view when somebody's watched the whole damn thing and does something with it, right? That's what matters to me. Or at least what matters to me when I have my branded content hat on. I'll tell you what actually matters to me when I bring Lee up on the stage. The other thing that a lot of the people talked about was not only do we need some consensus around what those baseline measurements should be, but can we start to think about emerging emotion tools and how emotion drives impact? We'll talk a little bit more about that. And there's a lot more deepness in the white paper than what we can cover in 30 minutes. And then importantly, even as we're waiting to get to standards and consensus, and even as we're waiting to get to these tools, many of them that may be inspired and driven by artificial intelligence, how do we take all the numbers that we've all said in this room at some point and turn them into actual knowledge? Because the thing that a lot of marketers said to me, and I was amazed at how honest they were, is I don't want you to keep telling me how amazing this program is and how many impressions it got and how it went beyond the numbers. I want you to tell me, did it work or it didn't work? And if it didn't work, why not? Because I'd like to actually have something that works. I just don't want to be told that we're great and wonderful and we've hit our numbers. Because we all know we can always hit our numbers, right? We can always pay for a bot to hit that site. We can always pay to get to the impressions that we need. Because it's not the dirty little secret. It is the very open, transparent knowledge that we all have, that we can spend money to get where we need to be. So you may ask yourself the question of why maybe I'm being as pushy as I am today, is because branded content has grown up. We're here at this meeting, everyone talking about storytelling, about branded content. It is expected to be a $13 billion part of the advertising industry, and while that is a minuscule amount of the amount of money spent on advertising every year, it is an amazing amount of money to be spent here in the United States. And so I think that we should have a grown-up way of measuring it, not just simply using the tools that are website analytics or advertising measurements that really don't do a great job of actually measuring content. And to David's talk yesterday, content is something that I actually want to consume. Story is something that I want to consume, whereas advertising has often been disruptive. And it makes me, and it's very binary. Did it do this or did it do this? Branded content is much more, there's a lot more possibility there. And interestingly, I don't know if people saw the study recently, that only 10% of content is actually viewed by a real human being in search engine results. 10% of that content. So 90% of what we create, no one actually sees. So that's a little concerning for me as a journalist, because I'm like, wow, I've created this amazing work and no one has actually ever seen it, right? And that's a little crazy, because we're spending a lot of money to get people to see this stuff and to care about things. And it's not just buying fun things like, music boxes, but it's about democracy, it's about impact entertainment, it's about caring about other people, it's about doing the work that I think a lot of great marketers do. So we need to grow up about the way we measure. So we need standards. So a couple of thoughts that came out. Can we as a group here create a working group on standards for branded content measurement? Is that something that brand storytelling needs to take on as an action item? Can we diminish the importance of metrics such as impressions and views? One of the marketers who I interviewed, and I quoted her in the white paper, and she came back to me after her comms team, and I'm not going to say who she was, who said, could you take that quote out? Because she said, if I see another slide that has impressions and views on it, I'm going to run screaming from the room. Because she's just like, I look at those and I think, yeah, I've put those numbers on slides, over and over and over again, but I know in my heart that I'm not really telling you anything. Can we increase the importance of metrics such as comments and affiliate links? So intriguingly, a lot of the marketers that I talked to said that commenting in social was a really good way for them to understand what people cared about. Again, I'll call out Skull Candy because I think it was interesting. You talked about how prior to 12 Moods, a lot of the commenting was on broken product and warranty, et cetera, et cetera. But all of us, as you moved into 12 Moods, you started to see the comments change. And so when you start to see those real human beings, and obviously you've got to take out the trolls, you got to take out all the people that are, I don't know what they do, spending their time all day making us feel terrible about ourselves, but they do it. Is you take those people out. Affiliate links, of course, is interesting, but that's e-commerce, right? Can I move somebody all the way down to doing something? And that doesn't always mean buying the product. It might mean something else, and I think Lee and I'll talk about that a little bit. And finally, stop ceding control to other people to tell you what measurements matter, right? So everyone said that brands are those people who should own what's important and what's not important to measure, not platforms. Because, video views may not be what's important to you. So you decide what's important. David Hallman of Nielsen said, ultimately, we need a consortium of advertiser agencies, platforms, and publishers driving this market. But these are the stakeholders who move the markets, and then everyone else will have to get on board or be left behind. So he's talking about standardization or consensus around what measurements matter. Because it's not the measurement companies, they'll follow along. They'll bring us the things that they see us needing. And you see Nielsen and Kantar and other new, new entrants to the market like a Notch and a Swayable coming in, along with many others, to say, how do we help you measure things better? So measuring emotions, I think, is really interesting, and it dives deeper in the white paper. And so I'm gonna leave this as one to have a discussion amongst yourselves. Again, Kirsten Falk here is understanding that she may actually need to create an emotional impact with consumers that she cannot measure. And she is okay with that. She may not be able to measure that. She might not be able to put it on a spreadsheet. But there is a possible future for measurement. And this is something to think about in your trail. Testing before launch or experimenting before launch has become much easier to test before launch. Put something out in the market, see what it does. Pull it back if it doesn't work. Neuroscience. So more on this in the white paper around system one thinking versus system two thinking. System one thinking, anybody? System one? It's your little reptilian brain that tells you to flee or fight. It tells you whether you love something or hate something in a split second. And it is what makes us buy things. It is what makes us love something. I don't know why I love Yeti, and yet I do. I actually don't know why I love that brand, but I love it, and I can't tell you why, but I buy it. Larger and larger data sets. So as we move to mobile, and as billions of people there's so much data coming off of mobile phones, and how do we use those larger data sets in real time to help us understand what our customers are doing? But I would also say that all in this, we still need standardization. We still need a consensus on what matters. And finally, just better data mining, getting better at using the data that we actually have. So until we get to the future, a few thoughts. Create a data chain, measure it, and own it, which we'll talk about with Lee. Measure branded content against your company's goals. If you don't, track those directly back to your branded content doing something, then you have to ask yourself, why did you do it? Why did you make that piece of content? Finally, connect with real people, especially if you want to impress the C-suite. As much as we think putting a deck of numbers in front of the C-suite, the marketers I spoke to said, if you can't tell your CEO in a sentence why something actually did what you needed it to do, then you're not going to spend very much time with her. You're just not, because she's busy. She's got other things to do. She wants to know it immediately. What did it do? Get out. And connecting with real people, oftentimes anecdotes, comments, the things that you hear back from real live human beings, not proxies for real live human beings, but real live human beings, is actually important and something that people in the C-suite want to know. Here are 5 questions quickly to ask about your data now. What's your source, and is it statistically significant? So don't use data that doesn't have statistical significance. Do I own my data? Really important. Do I just get a spreadsheet of it, or do I actually own that data? Good question, I think. Can I measure my goal? Can you measure the thing that you want to do? How fast can I turn my data around? This is becoming easier and easier, but if you're waiting months, weeks, maybe even days to get your data about what's working, then you can't optimize in real time. And finally, can I actually show this data to my CEO? Again, going back to the point of how much time are you going to have with that CEO and what is going to matter? And so I'm going to ask Lee to come up on stage. So I had said that I would tell you what matters to me as a metric. And the reason that I've asked Lee to come up is that it's rare that you get to stand on stage with a client, former client. The metric that mattered to me the most in my heart was the work that we did for Lee, I would say, holds up against any journalism that I'd have ever done in my career. And I'll say just quickly what it was about. I'll say I was at the Wall Street Journal. Lee was at Mini. We're not there anymore, so we can talk pretty freely about this. We got to do this amazing work around food insecurity and hunger in America, and what were the solutions to that. And it allowed me to spend an entire 3 months thinking about hunger in this country and coming across people who, it's not whether they worry about where their next meal is going to come from, but where next week's dinner is going to come from. And I think the most profound thing I heard, we had sent a team out on the road with Minnie during the rally, and we had a reporter driving and a videographer in the back seat editing, so we could turn things around in 24 hours. They happened to be on a Native American reservation in the Dakotas, and a woman said, hunger in America doesn't look like hunger in other places. Hunger in America is not having access to a fruit or a vegetable for months on time. Lots of carbohydrates out there, but not a lot of really good stuff. So Lee, that was my metric. And so we're going to talk about three things: data, trust, and having hard conversations. But I was wondering, how would you reflect on the work that we did and why it was important?
First of all, I think you deserve a round of applause for all the work you put into
Thank you.
the white paper that you'll read is pretty in-depth, but I'm so glad to stand here with you years after putting a program together. And I think at the end of the day, while it's interesting even today to hear you describe what was meaningful for you in the program, from the brand side, there really are a couple of fundamental questions, and we'll get into all the data sets and so forth, but what problem are you trying to solve? And while that sounds very simple, I think a lot of times, brands, as we come up with different ideas and cool ideas from agencies and media partners, and it's great to see them, so keep it coming. Sometimes that stimulates interesting ways to go. But what problem are you trying to solve in this specific case? And at the end of the day, I think you need to kind of tie together 3 C's. One is you're creating something that's going to lead to a connection and is ultimately going to lead to commerce. Whether that's buying something from that specific piece of content or not is to be discussed on each different program. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the brand is trying to sell something, a service, a product, whatever it is. And what we were able to do, I think, together when we figured out what problem we were trying to solve, in this case, it wasn't necessarily trying to focus specifically on the hunger issue. That was a mechanism to tell a bigger story about why the mini community had such a passionate affinity with the brand and the power of that community to be able to do good in the world. And so we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but it was actually a cross-country rally with thousands of mini owners who were able to then ultimately make a donation to Feeding America and provide over 1.2 million meals to people across the country. And Dow Jones came to the table to say, we can tell this story this way. And to have a journalist actually take that approach, and I think I loved hearing a lot of the discussions about entertainment and ways of approaching things from like legitimate storytelling. I think there's also still a lot to be learned from the journalists themselves of how to really dig into a story. And what we were able to do together, and again, simple, but I can't underline this enough, because we set up clear metrics in the beginning, from there, and those first 2 conversations were not easy, to really dig into what we were going to measure and how we were going to be able to make an impact. After that, we took our hands kind of off the wheel, and we allowed the creators to do what they do best. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I would say that, I said to Lee, one of the things that, because measurement, I think, is really important, and metrics in this trust conversation. And it surprised me that the thing that I said is I'm lucky to stand on stage with a client that I have had such a good relationship with, and realize that I shouldn't feel lucky. It shouldn't be unusual to have a great relationship with a client, right? That should be the usual. But in fact, it's not. And oftentimes, it comes down to the conversation about what are we measuring, what are we trying to get, what are we trying to do? And unless you have those very good conversations and very tough conversations early on, you can't get to the trust, and then you can't have sort of the pushback, that comes, that also then leads to a great program.
Yeah, I think also one thing that is important, because I come from the agency side and the media side, and then going in-house at a well-established company, it's hard internally. I got to tell you, it's not always that brands don't know what they want. It's just there's a lot of moving pieces, and of course you always want to hit sales every single month in a car company, and there's different brands that have different metrics that they're looking at daily, weekly, etc. but not every program can actually have a linear effect on those immediately. So sometimes you really are trying to cement some perception of the brand, change some perception of the brand, or do something directly where you are trying to get more leads, whether it's done branded programs where sign up for the sweepstakes and we know exactly how many we're getting and so forth. But some of this is short term, some of this is long term, some of this is tactical, and some of this is emotional. And when you start to put that matrix together, you really need to focus on what this one program is trying to achieve in a singular fashion. What problem am I trying to solve? And now you can dig into how do we measure it. And that's a combination of the agency having tools, the media partner having tools and ways to look at it, and then the brand. And the brand has to step forward to say, and we're going to provide these results as well. The biggest problem that I see, and a lot of these programs are awesome to do, is everyone gets nervous. And the nerves come into place once this program starts going. And a lot of times this happens because you actually aren't able to do one simple thing. And I kind of use a simple analogy of playing sports together on a field. Everybody on that field has to be able to look up at the scoreboard and know what the score is while you're playing. The biggest problem that I see is these recap reports a month or two after the program to try and now convince you to do another one. And while some of those things do need to happen later, because especially the long-term brand metrics take some time, you need to have a scoreboard that everyone can look at while the program is happening so that you can optimize along the way and pull different levers. I think Skull Candy was talking about that really well, to be able to actually make moves and say, that's not working, let's move it over here. Yeah.
And I think for publishers and platforms, I would say as you're talking, I sort of think about this interesting perspective of what is the publisher's participation in this, and why does this program matter to us in the same way that it matters to you?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, particularly for publishers, we want to win the business, we want to do the work, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything to us as a brand. But I would say, I think it meant a lot for us as the Journal to be able to do a program that showed our investigative reporting skills from a brand perspective, but then also to take that all the way into the food forum in which we presented this report from the road that I think broke new ground around what are the solutions to hunger and food insecurity in America. Because there are a lot of really amazing solutions out there. And so I think, putting those two things together so that everyone has a reason for wanting to do this great work.
Yeah, and as Soul Pancake talked about yesterday, actually doing things that can make a difference makes everyone feel good. At the end of the day, though, the consumer, the person who's viewing this, both from somebody from Dow Jones or from Mini, a current customer or a prospect, at the end of the day, it's what they think. Right? So it's great that you feel good and I feel good and all that. But one of the key things is to really try and understand and watch as people are seeing your content and engaging with things. And I love to ask the simple question of, and then what's supposed to happen? So even if, again, you're not ultimately getting to sales from this initial program, what is supposed to happen next? Whether it's getting more people to be able to retarget later or whatever, this program has to feed into that process. And, it's all fun and we can all applaud great content until someone misses a KPI. So.
Yeah. So we are almost out of time. I want to leave you. Oh, do you want to take questions, Rick, or? Okay. Great. All right. I want to leave so that everybody on the trail sort of gets an idea of what to talk about, although I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion, is do you trust your numbers? Are you comfortable with them? So talk amongst yourselves about that. And what do you think of this idea of standards and consensus? Do you think the industry can really get behind that? Or are you pretty much happy with the free-for-all that's out there? And is... I don't know, maybe you are, and it's awesome. And is emotion something that we can measure, and is it something we should be measuring? Because as a journalist, for me, I want you to talk back. I want you to talk back against the white paper, because this is an evolving conversation. So, Lee, any final points before
No,
we
I'm
take
happy
some
to take any
questions?
questions.
So any
Anyone?
questions out there? Anybody? Yeah, so there was a study recently, and I will find it and send it so that Drew can send it around. It's basically, it's an SEO, so that only 10% of content is actually showing up in search engine results. So the other 90% is sitting out there, but isn't actually, there's nothing pushing you to do it. So, but I'll find the study because it was intriguing to me.
That wasn't in your report when you
It was
came back with the
Yeah.
results for us, by the way.
No, it wasn't. No, everybody saw the mini content. Everybody saw that. The whole world.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments before we end?
Okay.
Well,
Well,
one
here's
last
one.
one.
Hear that? What'd you repeat that question?
Sure. Hoping you can speak to sentiment analysis and sort of the broad metric that it is.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a journalist, I mean, sentiment again is a very tough thing to measure. As I work through the white paper, I think there were starting to be some interesting ways of measuring how people felt about something, the emotion that they got to. And I don't want to call out anybody in particular, but Story Worldwide is really interesting in looking at this concept of System 1 thinking. And what is that immediate sort of gut reaction that you have, right? So, and measuring that, that seems impossible. But there are ways that there are companies out there who are starting to think about that. I mean, for me, sentiment measurement is completely one of those things that is not scientific at all. Because we're being very scientific here, as I've heard. As I will always say to my creators, if I don't feel something in the back of my throat, if my jaw doesn't either go to cry or to laugh, you haven't done your job for me. You haven't created an emotional impact with me. And so if you don't do it for me in that room, I'm doubtful whether you're going to do it with someone, just watching something. So, but Lee, you might have.
Yeah, I think that's
Sentiment.
a big place to get to, and not every piece can be that emotional, but I do think somebody talked about it yesterday of surveys and all kinds of things. There are opportunities to kind of go deeper, and we've done that with different programs. I think social media still, and again, you have to kind of weed out some of the haters and people just trying to get attention, but I think it's ultimately one of the greatest focus groups for brands. To be able to watch in real time, like, are people actually like getting a certain message and what are they saying about it, more than just a like or a bad comment or so forth, but like what is coming through. And so we've done things when I was at Mini to try to figure out like, what is that one message if we could get somebody to say this to another friend of, look what Mini's doing and this happened. Somebody won't say it exactly like that, but could we actually measure in social and other places to see how close they're getting to that thing we're trying to solve, that message we're trying to get, that way we're trying to get somebody to think about the brand. And you have to be able to watch it. And then you can change, again, your messaging along the way to see if it has an effect. And I think, again, most times you're looking at this in the rearview mirror and it's too late. Yeah, I think we have one more question. Great. Yep. That's a great question. I mean, these tools are going to continue to evolve. You know, while stories might be a hard place to do it, then they're obviously building in e-commerce, you know, right into social also. So again, going back to that create, connect commerce, can you see how that moves through basically in the car business? There was a funnel and so forth, and every company has a different way of looking at it. The tools are changing before our eyes. I think this is what leads us to being pretty optimistic about taking measurement to the next level and actually getting some of these platforms as well to figure out how to bring some of these tools into action in a way that we can actually do something about it while we're still in the campaign and we can make it successful.
And I think it goes to the point of, because obviously the platforms are going to continue to evolve and work toward their business model and what they need, not toward what I may need as a journalist or what you may need as a marketer, right? And that is their business function. So going back to that key question that I asked is, do you own your data? So where can you find commenting elsewhere that isn't on a third-party site? A couple of the people that I interviewed literally depend on every morning a survey coming into them that they get, you know, from various vendors. But it is a survey of their consumers every single morning to get a sense of that. So it's not just depending on the social platforms, but other ways of commenting. But it's a great question.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.